Okay, first thing, I just want you to look at the POD because I am not here to go over it with you. Okay, so this is our vertex form, so graphing our quadratics. Okay, so to determine how it opens, remember you want to look at your sign out front. So since this is a negative, we know that it should open down. Okay. My vertex, remember you look at the inside. We don't want to use the same as the inside, but we want to use the opposite. So the opposite of negative 3 is a positive 3, and the outside stays the same. So we have a positive 2. So I know my vertex is 3, 2. If I know my vertex, I automatically know my line of symmetry, which is going through x equals 3. Okay, my y narrower neither. Remember, we're looking at your value of a. Not the sign, just the number. So if I have a positive 2, then I should be narrow because that is greater than 1. If it was greater than 1, it was narrow. If it was less than 1, it was wide. And if it was equal to 1, it was neither. Okay, and then to evaluate a point, to get another point on my graph, we just want to pick a number close to my x. So I want to pick a number close to 3. So I could either pick 2 or 4. I am going to pick 2. So I am picking 2 for x, so I'm going to plug that in. Wherever I have an x, I am plugging in 2. Remember, it's important to follow our order of operations when we're solving. So you want to take care of your parentheses first. So you have 2 minus 3, which is negative 1. And we want to take care of our exponent. So negative 1 squared is 1 times negative 2 is negative 2. Plus 2 gives me 0. So my point that I evaluated, I plugged in 2 for x, and I got 0. So I have 2, 0. I can draw the left side of my parabola, and if I go 1 to the left, remember our line of reflection, we can go 1 to the right and draw a nice U. Okay, now you want to get your pink notes out, so the pink notes that you picked up off the desk, and look at the first slide. Okay, so I want you to graph y equals the absolute value of x using a table with x values from negative 2 to 2. Okay, if you happen to forget what the table is, that is the same thing as an xy chart or a t chart. So we want to go from negative 2 to 2. And then you're going to plug x in to get y. So I'm going to give you a couple seconds to plug each of these values in to get your value of y. Okay, so if I plug in negative 2, I want to know the absolute value of negative 2, which would be 2. The absolute value of negative 1 is 1. Absolute value of 0 is 0. Absolute value of 1 is 1. And the absolute value of 2 is 2. Remember, absolute value tells you the distance from 0. Okay, so now I'm going to plot these points. So my first point, I knew x was negative 2 and y was 2. So I'm at negative 2, 2. Negative 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, and 2, 2. Now, with parabolas, so like our POD, we had a U. That was what a parabola was. It was curved. Absolute value functions, if you look, your points look like they're making a V. So absolute value functions should be a V. Think value V. So I'm going to make a nice V, and don't forget the arrows at the ends of your graph. Okay, looking at your graph, if you observe your y-axis, do you notice anything about the left side of your graph and the right side of your graph? Okay, just like our quadratic functions, if you look back, it is a reflection. You have a reflection of the left side of your graph to the right side of your graph. So just like quadratic functions, you have a line of symmetry going directly through your vertex. Okay, so we're going to use that to help us graph. Okay, so looking at our actual function, let me make that a little bigger. Okay, just like before, the plus minus, okay, I want you to get your highlighter and highlight these. The plus minus tells you if it's positive, it opens up. If it's negative, it opens down. Okay, A, just like our quadratics, tells you if it's wide, narrow, or neither. So if A is equal to 1, it should be neither, which just says normal, which is the same thing as neither. Okay, if A was less than 1, so if A is less than 1, we know it is wide. So if A was less than 1, it was wide. And if A was greater than 1, it was narrow. So when A was less than 1, it was wide. This says A is greater than 0 or less than 1 because it's always going to be positive numbers. That's why it is like that. Okay, H, just like before, tells us our horizontal shift. Okay, so H tells me the horizontal shift. You're still thinking opposite, so think opposite. So if you have a positive H, the opposite of positive is negative, which means it will be left. And if you have a negative, it's shifting right. K tells you your vertical shift. Okay, and the outside stays the same. If it's positive, it shifts up. Negative, it shifts down. And your vertex is still the same thing. You're taking the opposite of the inside. Outside stays the same. So opposite of inside. And then the outside's the same. Okay, so we're going to use these little rules to help us graph the following examples. Okay, so the first one. First thing I want to identify is my vertex, which we just said is the opposite of the inside. Outside stays the same. So the opposite of positive 1 would be negative 1, and the outside, negative 2. So I'm going to plot my vertex at negative 1, negative 2. For our absolute value, you do not have to draw the line of symmetry, but if it helps you, I would draw it. So you remember where you're reflecting your point. Okay, so from 0 for our horizontal, our horizontal and vertical shift. So from 0, did I move left or right to get to my vertex? I moved left, and then I move up or down? Well, I moved down. Okay, so we know negative 1 for my vertex. Negatives are to the left, so I move left. Negative 2, that's down, so I move down. So left and down. Okay, then my wide, narrow, or neither. Remember, you're looking at just the number, not the sign. So I have 3, which is greater than 1. So I'm narrow. Does this look like a V? No, so I'm still missing my point. So just like our POD, we had to evaluate a point. So I'm going to evaluate a point. So I'm still picking a number close to my AOS. So I'm going to pick 0. So wherever I have X, I'm going to plug in 0. So I have negative 3, my absolute value of 0 plus 1 minus 2. So I need to take care of my absolute value first. So 0 plus 1, which is 1. So I have my negative 3 times the absolute value of 1 minus 2. So this is the absolute value of 1. 1. So I have negative 3 times 1 minus 2, which is negative 5. So I plugged in 0 and I got negative 5. Now if you try plugging this in your calculator, it will not work, so you need to make sure that you are doing this by hand. So let's take care of the absolute value first. So I'm at 0, negative 5. Okay, so I can draw my right side of my graph. Okay, so still using my line of reflection. If I went right 1, I can go left 1 and draw a nice V again. Okay, if you take a second, look at your value out front of your absolute value. So you have a negative 3. Do you notice anything about your vertex going down to the point you evaluated? We went down 1, 2, 3. So I went down 3, and then I went right 1. Negative 3 over 1 reduces to negative 3. So this value in front is like a slope. So if you have your vertex, you do not need to evaluate a point anymore. You can just apply your term out front and make it your slope. So negative 3, you need to go down 3 and right 1 and then reflect it. So we're going to use that to help us on the next one. Okay, so looking at the next one, first thing I want to do is get my vertex. So I want the opposite of the inside, and the outside stays the same. So I'm at negative 1, 5. Again, if it helps, draw your line of symmetry, but you do not need it. Okay, did I move left or right? So for my horizontal shift, I moved left. For my vertical shift, I moved up. A is 1/2. 1/2 is less than 1, so we are wide. And again, you can either evaluate a point or you can look at your term out front, 1/2. So you know you're going to up a positive 1 and right 2. So think of that as slope. So up 1, over 2. Try to make nice straight lines. Okay, just to double check, say I want to plug in 0. Actually, let me make my lines a little straighter, so then once I evaluate a point, it's more accurate. Okay, so say I pick 0, so I'm going to plug in 0. So I have 1/2, the absolute value of 0 plus 1 plus 5. 0 plus 1 is 0, or 0 plus 1 is 1. So I have 1/2 times the absolute value of 1 is 1 plus 5. So 1/2 times 1 is 1/2 plus 5 is 5 and 1/2. So I plugged in 0, got 5 and 1/2, which if you would check, 0, 5 and 1/2, does that match my graph? Yes, so you can do this extra work on the side, or you can just apply the slope with the number out front. It's a lot easier to count up 1 and go right 2 than work all of this out. Okay, so let's look at the next graph. My vertex. Remember, you want the opposite. So you have 4, and the outside, negative 2. So I'm at 4, negative 2. Okay, so from 0, did I move left or right? Right. Did you move up or down? Down. I don't have a term out front, okay, so I know that has to be a positive 1, which means this would be neither. If A is equal to 1, it is neither. Okay, then we know 1 is my slope. So my slope, I'm going up 1, right 1. I can go up 1, right 1. I can go up 1, left 1. You need to make sure that you're making a nice straight V with arrows on the end. If it's not continuous, then it is not a function. Okay, this last thing I want you to try on your own before I go over it. So I want you to try doing this one on your own. So find your vertex first. Okay, so my vertex, remember we want the opposite, so positive 3, positive 2. From 0, did you move left or right? Right. Did you move up or down? You moved up. Okay, we have a 2 out front. Remember, you look at the number, just the number, not sign. So 2 is greater than 1, which means we are narrow. And then use your negative 2 as your slope. So from your vertex, you're going down 2, right 1, down 2, left 1. And you're making a nice V. Okay, I need you to flip to the back side of your notes. These aren't on there, but I need you to follow along because this will be on your homework. Okay, so we're going to write an equation representing our function. So before, they gave us the equation and we graphed it. And we always found our vertex first. So when I'm writing my equation, first thing I'm going to do is identify my vertex, which if you look, is negative 2, negative 3. So looking back at the example, our vertex, the x of the vertex, was the opposite of the inside. So to set up my equation, inside, I don't want a negative 2, I want a plus 2. And does the outside ever change? Well, looking back, we have a plus 2 on the outside, and my vertex is a plus 2. So we know that has to stay a minus 3. And then to find A, remember, you can just use slope. So from my vertex, I went up 1, 2, 3, 4. So plus 4. And I went over 1. So my slope is 4 over 1, which is 4. 4. So I can represent the function using 4, absolute value of x plus 2 minus 3. Okay, so look at the next one. I want you to try to do this one at your seat. Okay, so even though there isn't a problem on the back, I still want you to try to write this down. So just like before, identify your vertex first. 3, 3. Okay, so I'm going to set up my formula. Okay, so again, for the inside your absolute value, you still want to use the opposite. Opposite of positive 3 is negative 3. Outside stays the same. And then for A, this is your slope. So what you did from your vertex to get to a point. So you went down 1, so negative 1, you went down 1, and right 3, so positive 3. So you went down 1 over 3. Okay, so you will get a worksheet, and on the front side, the first 6 problems, you do not have to graph, you're just answering the question. So find your vertex first. If it helps, I would write how you know if it's wide, narrow, or neither, which is at the very first slide, second slide of your note. So go back here. This tells you if it's wide, narrow, or neither. I would write that down. On the back side, the first 4 on the back side, you're graphing. The only thing that I need you to write down is the vertex, and you can just use your value of A as the slope. And then the bottom 2 is just like our last 2 examples, coming up with your own equations. If you have questions, ask the person beside you, but please try to get this done for homework tomorrow. I'll answer any questions tomorrow when I get back into class.